Tuesday, March 12, 1974, 11:27 a.m. Waylon Jennings walked into First Lone Star Savings and Loan and saw two men about to turn fear into a lifetime. Gun already raised, cash spilling across the counter, teller frozen mid-breath, fluorescent lights humming like the world wasn't about to break. And Waylon walked straight into the middle of it. Didn't duck, didn't raise his hands, didn't donate panic to the room. He just stepped through the door, leather jacket and cowboy hat, and became the calmest person in the building. Then he did something nobody expected. He gave them an exit that didn't humiliate them. What happened in the next 90 seconds didn't just stop a robbery. It stopped the moment from becoming a wound that never heals. A story that gets replayed until everyone involved is buried under shame or trauma or headlines. And Waylon did it without a single heroic gesture. He just refused to let panic win. To understand what happened at First Lone Star that morning, you need to understand what Temple, Texas was like in 1974. Small-town stillness with just enough life to keep the diners and gas stations open. The kind of place where musicians pass through on their way to somewhere bigger. Waylon Jennings was passing through. By 1974, Waylon had already fought his way out of every system that tried to control him, told RCA to back off, told producers he'd record his own way, told Nashville he didn't need their permission. He'd earned his freedom the hard way. But freedom came with a code. You don't ignore harm when you see it. You don't let fear make someone else's decisions. And you don't turn a bad moment into a spectacle just because you can. First Lone Star Savings and Loan was a small-town bank on Main Street, with 3 teller windows, beige walls, and carpet that smelled like decades of quiet transactions. Marjorie Klein, the head teller, remembered your name and asked about your kids. Frank Delaney, the unarmed security guard, sat behind a desk reading the paper because nothing ever happened, until it did. Earl Watkins had been planning this for 3 weeks, not because he was a criminal, because he was desperate. Earl was 34, worked construction, had a wife and 2 kids. His youngest got sick, real sick, the kind that requires surgeries and specialists and bills that don't stop coming. Insurance didn't cover it. Savings ran out. Credit maxed. He'd asked everyone for help, borrowed everything he could. It still wasn't enough. So Earl did the kind of math desperate men do. The math that says, if I don't do something, my kid doesn't get the treatment. Cal Rusk was Earl's cousin, the only family who'd ever helped him when he needed it. When Earl asked, "Will you help me?" Cal said yes, before he knew what he was saying yes to. That's how 2 men who'd never committed a crime ended up walking into First Lone Star at 11:26 a.m. on a Tuesday. Earl's hand was shaking when he pulled the gun, not because he wanted to use it, because he was terrified. "Nobody move," Earl said. His voice came out wrong, too high, too tight. Marjorie Klein's hands froze mid-count. She was processing a deposit, 20s and 5s spread across the counter. Frank Delaney stood up, started to reach for the phone. "Don't," Earl said. The gun wobbled. Frank sat back down. Cal hopped the counter, movements jerky, started grabbing cash from Marjorie's drawer. Not methodical, just panicked. 2 other customers pressed themselves against the walls. The whole room was holding its breath. And then the front door opened. Waylon Jennings walked in. He'd been on his way to Dallas. Stopped for gas. Needed to cash a check. Simple errand. Ordinary Tuesday. Except the moment he stepped through the door, nothing was ordinary. His eyes took in the scene in 3 glances. Earl, gun raised but shaking. A man about to break. Cal, behind the counter, stuffing bills into a bag with trembling hands. A follower who didn't want to be there. Marjorie frozen, eyes wide, breathing shallow, trying not to trigger something worse. Waylon didn't duck, didn't throw his hands up, didn't make a scene. He just stopped moving, let the door swing shut behind him, and became the stillest thing in the room. Earl spun toward him. The gun followed. "Don't move," Earl said, voice desperate. Waylon didn't move, but he also didn't freeze the way fear makes you freeze. He just stood there, hat on, leather jacket, calm eyes, and that stillness did something to the room. It lowered the temperature, made the panic feel less contagious. Earl's hand shook harder. "I said don't move." Waylon's voice came out quiet, conversational. "I'm not moving." 6 seconds of silence. Cal stopped counting. Marjorie's breathing got louder. Frank was frozen behind his desk. Earl's jaw tightened. The gun stayed up. But his eyes betrayed him. They weren't the eyes of a man who wanted to hurt anyone. They were the eyes of a man terrified of looking weak. Waylon saw it, read it in the way Earl's knuckles were white on the grip, in the way his breath was too fast. And Waylon made a choice. He didn't try to be a hero, didn't try to talk Earl down or wrestle the gun away. He just spoke again, quieter, like he was giving Earl permission to stop. "You're going to make this worse than it needs to be." That line landed like a hand on someone's shoulder, firm, but not aggressive. Earl's breath hitched. "Shut up!" The gun angled higher, but it was shaking more. Waylon didn't flinch, just kept his voice low. "You already got what you came for." 7 words. That's all it took, because Waylon wasn't asking Earl to surrender, wasn't shaming him, wasn't cornering him. He was offering something more valuable, a way out that didn't end in humiliation. Earl's hand dropped half an inch. Not much, but enough. Cal saw it. Shoved the last handful of bills into the bag. Faster now, because he wanted this to be over. Earl looked at Waylon, really looked at him, at the choice Waylon was giving him. You can leave, right now, and nobody has to get hurt. Waylon shifted his weight slightly, just enough to clear the path to the door, the smallest movement in the world, but it changed everything. Cal zipped the bag. "We got it. Let's go." Earl lowered the gun. Not all the way, but enough. He backed toward the door, eyes still on Waylon. Waylon didn't move. Earl reached the door, pushed it open. Cal was already through. They left. The door swung shut, and the room realized it had survived. The silence that followed wasn't relief. Not yet. It was the kind that happens after something terrible almost happens, when your body is still braced for impact even though the danger is gone. Marjorie's hand started shaking, not during, after. Frank stood up, legs unsteady, reached for the phone. The 2 customers exhaled like they'd been underwater, and Waylon walked to the counter. Marjorie looked up at him, eyes wet, hands trembling as she tried to straighten the scattered deposit slips. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't know what to do." Waylon's voice stayed quiet. "You did enough. You kept people calm." Marjorie's lip quivered. "I wasn't calm." "Nobody in here was calm," Waylon said. "But you didn't make it worse. That's what mattered." Then he did something Marjorie wouldn't forget for the rest of her life. He stepped slightly to the side, positioned himself so the other customers couldn't see her shaking. So Frank, on the phone with the police, wasn't staring at her, so she had a moment to fall apart without an audience. He lowered his voice even more. "Don't replay it out loud. Let it die here." Marjorie nodded, tears running down her cheeks now. But she understood. Waylon wasn't telling her to pretend it didn't happen. He was telling her not to give the moment more life than it deserved, not to let shame or fear turn it into something that haunted her. He slid a withdrawal slip across the counter, his handwriting neat, his tone normal. "Take your time," he said. Marjorie blinked. "You..." You still need to cash a check? If it's not too much trouble. It was the most ordinary sentence in the world, and it was exactly what Marjorie needed. A return to normal, a signal that life kept going. She processed the check, hands still shaking, but steadier now. Waylon signed the slip, folded it, stood to leave. At the door, he paused, looked back at the room one more time. His voice carried across the lobby. Quiet, final. A bad moment doesn't deserve a longer life. Then he walked out. Within 48 hours, word spread through Temple. Not through the news, just whispers. Stories passed between bank employees and customers and people who knew people. You hear what happened at First Lone Star? Robbery. 2 guys. Waylon Jennings walked in right in the middle of it. What did he do? Talk them out. Didn't fight. Just made it so they could leave without it turning into a bloodbath. By Friday, every diner in Temple knew the story. By Sunday, it had reached Austin. By the end of the month, musicians who'd never met Waylon were telling it like they'd been there. But here's what made the story different. It wasn't about what Waylon did. It was about what he didn't do. He didn't turn it into a spectacle, didn't give interviews, didn't brag about stopping a robbery. He just let it end. Quietly, without fanfare. And in doing that, he protected everyone in that room, not just from violence, from the story becoming bigger than the people inside it. Marjorie Klein kept working at First Lone Star for another 18 years. She never talked about the robbery, not because she was ashamed, because Waylon had given her permission not to. Frank Delaney told the story once, to his wife that night, then never again. The 2 customers moved on. Remembered it, sure, but it didn't define them. Earl Watkins and Cal Rusk were caught soon after. But that's not the part Temple kept repeating. Years later, someone asked Waylon why he didn't just walk out. Waylon said, because fear corners people. Then he changed the subject, like it didn't deserve a longer life. The story of what happened at First Lone Star didn't turn Waylon into a hero. It just confirmed what people already knew about him. Waylon Jennings didn't play by anybody's rules except his own. And his rules said, you don't let fear grow when you can shrink it. You don't humiliate people who are already broken. And you don't turn a bad moment into a legend when you can bury it and let everyone move on. That's what made Waylon dangerous. Not because he was tough, not because he was fearless, but because he understood something most men don't. Strength isn't about how hard you can fight. It's about knowing when not to. Earl got out years later. His daughter survived, got the treatment she needed, grew up healthy. Someone asked Earl about that morning, about the man in the cowboy hat. You ever think about what would have happened if he hadn't been there? Earl was quiet for a long time. Every day. Why? Because he gave me a chance to stop being the worst version of myself. Most people see you at your lowest and decide that's who you are forever. But Waylon didn't? Earl shook his head. Waylon saw me at my lowest and still treated me like I was capable of making a better choice. And that's the only reason I made it. Years after that morning, musicians coming up in Texas would hear the story. They'd ask the old heads about Waylon, about how he survived the industry, about how he stayed true when everyone else sold out. The old heads would tell them, Waylon understood something most people don't. Mercy isn't weakness. It's the hardest kind of strength there is. And if the young musicians asked for an example, the old heads would say, March 12th, 1974. First Lone Star Savings and Loan. 2 men with a gun. 1 man with a choice. 0 regrets. That was all the explanation needed. Because at the end of the day, what happened in that bank wasn't about stopping a robbery. It was about stopping the moment from becoming something nobody could walk away from. Waylon didn't win that moment. He buried it. He didn't make it a legend. He made it a closed door. And that's why everyone walked out smiling like survivors do. Because the moment didn't follow them home.